It's been a long-held belief by some people on YouTube, mostly in the comments section, actually. I'm not really talking about other YouTubers, although I've heard it on other YouTube channels also, that the FCC doesn't care if you violate some arbitrary law that you don't agree with, okay? Well, here is a story today about an actual FCC citation of a GMRS user. This isn't even about ham radio. This is about a GMRS user that got cited for illegal types of transmissions on GMRS frequencies, even though he's a licensed user. Look at this. So over here at natcommagazine.com, okay, it says, yes, the FCC is citing violators. Don't think that general mobile radio service infractions are going unnoticed. This is written by Chuck Geezy, and from June of this year, and into DUP, I assume that's his call sign, amateur radio call sign. So Chuck into DUP, he's the author of the article, not who the violation is against. There's a common myth the FCC doesn't pay much attention to GMRS, let alone its sister radio service, FRS. But that's far from the truth. In most services, if there's interference complaint, FCC agents pounce into action in an effort to remove the problem. There's incentive, too, if you think about it. If the FCC finds interference to be malicious, a nice hefty fine may be levied, helping to pay for enforcement costs and then for some FCC coffers, for the FCC's coffers. Just like a speeding ticket, just like a fine about whatever you do in any aspect of life, if they find you to be in violation of something and they fine you and you have to pay this money, they make more money. So why not? A recent enforcement action taken by the FCC against GMRS, a GMRS licensee, has pretty much gone unnoticed by most media as well as hobbyists and the web. Continue reading for details. Okay, so this is, yeah, I haven't seen this one, this specific one yet, although I do try to watch Not a Rubicon where I can, and it's possible he mentioned this one and I didn't see it, but he has mentioned other ones in the past, even if he didn't talk about this one. In a notice of violation issued on June 7th, the FCC cited GMRS operator from Washington State for transmitting continuous, unmodulated signals on 462.725 megahertz. The FCC tracked down the signal to the Meisner Lookout communication site near Deer Island, Oregon, which is northwest of Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. In his letter to Martin T. Anderson, who holds a GMRS license WQQP653, the FCC said the agent inspected the site on April 26 and found a faulty Motorola Radius transmitter sending out continuous signal transmission on GMRS frequency from the peaks. So continuous transmissions are illegal. The next part of this article shows this gentleman's picture. I don't want to show his picture. I think it might be in a little bit bad taste for this article to show a picture of the guy, but they say the picture was taken from the mygmrs.com website, so it's a picture that he freely shared on a public website. So, okay, maybe I should show it, but I'm not gonna do that, so we're gonna skip through that part real quick. So the citation is about a continuous signal. So down here at this last paragraph on this one, in citing the violation, FCC notes that GMRS Rule 95.1733 Alpha 10 states GMRS stations must not communicate continuous or uninterrupted transmissions except for communications involving immediate safety of life and property. So, in other words, if they have like a pirate radio station, someone just keys up and broadcasts something, a talk radio show, music, whatever, something like that, then that is illegal according to the terms of the GMRS license. Now, you might say, well, how would you know that? Well, you're supposed to read that big, long freaking document. When you go and sign up for GMRS license and check all the boxes and put your name and information in there and your credit card to pay the $35 fee, you're supposed to read all that stuff. Nobody does it. I didn't do it. I didn't read any of that crap, but I'm like, I know basic radio etiquette, so I'm like, I kind of know what to do anyway. You have to learn a lot of that to get your ham radio license, but you don't have to learn anything to get your GMRS license. I've always said that the biggest thing is just don't be a jerk on the air, and you'll probably go unnoticed by most people. So this continuous transmission that they're talking about here is just, it's a side of this, and they put a notice of the violation right here. Martin T. Anderson, WQPP653 is his call sign, his GMRS call sign in Vancouver. So there we go. A letter was sent to Anderson's address, a mail drop in Vancouver. He has held a GMRS license since January of 2013 and has been a licensed amateur radio operator since 1995. In the presentation at the 2014 CPAC. CPAC is a ham fest, a ham radio festival or like a trade show that we have in Seaside, Oregon once a year. I've never been. I've always wanted to go. It's probably on my bucket list for next year. I might accompany Buddy Pull up there. We'll see what happens with that. Speaking of Hamfest, the Huntsville Hamfest in Huntsville, Alabama, which is largely regarded as the third largest Hamfest in the United States, happens this week. At the time of the recording that you're watching this video, it's happening this week. You can go by the Gigaparts table and get a 20% off of anything from LDG Electronics at that Hamfest. I don't know if they're doing like rain checks or online orders during that time. Contact Gigaparts and let them know, or inquire, and I'll inquire also, and maybe I'll put a comment down below after the fact. But you can get 20% discount off of everything LDG. LDG and Gigaparts are sponsoring this video, so I thank them for that. But go by their table at the Huntsville Hamfest. I keep wanting to say Houston. It's not in Houston, it's in Huntsville. Huntsville, Alabama Hamfest. It's a great show. It's a fantastic show. We're going to be out there for 4 or 5 days during this week. While at the time you're watching the video, I'll probably already be there. And we're going to go out there and we're going to activate a lot of POTA on Montesano website, Montesano State Park. LDG is going to have this sale going on at Saturday and Sunday during the Hamfest. Go by the Gigaparts booth, tell them that you saw this video, and ask them about their 20% discount on everything LDG. So thank you to Gigaparts and to LDG for supporting this channel. So apparently he's been cited at this point in time. This article does not give a number, a dollar amount about, would say it's going to be a $2,000 fine or a $10,000 fine or whatever. It doesn't really say anything about that at all. The letter did mention that it's giving him a few days to respond. Like I think it said 10 days to respond, and then they'll take further action. But he has replied to it already, saying, you know, it's a faulty transmitter and something's going on here. He says right here that the Mesner lookout site apparently was where Anderson had a repeater on 462.725. The repeater, identified as Columbia 725 on mygmrs.com, is described as part of the system of 3 repeaters linked to the radio by the cover the lower Columbia River Gateway. The listing goes on to say the repeater at the Meisner Lookout is undergoing upgrades and has a temporary replacement, so the continuous transmission has already been addressed. In closing, FCC letter states that it will use all relevant information received to determine whether any enforcement action is required to ensure compliance with FCC rules. While GMRS infractions are few and far between, they do happen, and the FCC will go after cases of interference. They likely won't go after you for not using your call sign or using the equipment that isn't type accepted for GMRS. Okay, so you're reading it here. This is the opinion of the author of this article. They likely won't go after you for not using your call sign or using equipment that isn't type accepted for GMRS. In other words, if you have a Part 90 Motorola radio or you have a ham radio that you opened up and Mars modded and use it on GMRS frequencies, they'll likely not go after you. Now, I'm not telling you should do that, and I'm not telling you shouldn't do that. I'm just reading the article. So don't come by and say, well, Jason, you said it was okay. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm reading that this guy thinks that they likely won't go after you. And as far as using your call sign goes, I was talking with a few guys at the Rendezvous in the Ozarks event last fall of 2022. And I was given a short presentation on amateur radio and kind of how it differed from GMRS radio and whatnot. A lot of those guys were surprised to hear that you're actually supposed to identify your call sign every 10 minutes. Again, if you read that really long freaking document that you sign your name on and pay your money for when you get your GMRS license, you're supposed to identify your call sign on GMRS frequencies every 10 to 15 minutes. Do people do that? Very rarely. Very rarely do I hear that. When I'm out overlanding with some guys and we're following everyone in a caravan, nobody IDs. We just talk to each other. But there's a couple of repeaters here in town that I talk on, GMRS repeaters I talk on sometime, and everyone IDs. Well, after talking to those guys the first 2 or 3 times, I find out they're all hams anyway. So of course they're going to ID. It's common nature, and it's second nature for us to ID on a repeater when we're talking, and even simplex too. But it is a requirement, even though nobody follows it. Bear that in mind. Just say, oh, well, that's not required on GMRS. Yes, it is. That's why they give you a call sign, so you can ID yourself. So, and it goes on to say, and I might look this article up, another recent violation cited by the FCC involved a business radio licensee that had FRS frequencies in their business radios at power levels above those allowed by FRS rules. FRS is generally restricted to about half a watt or 1 watt on some channels, maybe 2 watts. I think 2 watts max on most channels, but it can go down to half a watt on a few channels as well. The initial action in that case was for something entirely different, but they discovered the FRS channels while inspecting equipment. So they had commercial equipment with FRS frequencies programmed into them. Now, you could argue because FRS and GMRS share frequencies, but if you notice in your GMRS radio, there are certain channels that don't go above a half a watt, 0.5 watts. And that's for FRS restrictions. Even though you've got more power capabilities on some GMRS frequencies, it's not that way on all of them. So if they have an FRS low power frequency in their commercial band and they're transmitting 5 or 10 watts on it from their Motorola radio, that's a big no-no. And apparently there's an example of an article where they're doing exactly that. So don't think that you are exempt or somehow excused from properly using your GMRS license and your GMRS repeater and your GMRS radio. If they say, oh, they're never going to come after you, that's just not true. I mean, the likelihood of them coming after you is small, but it's not zero. So why take the chance? My only and again, the only thing that I've ever actually said about any of this is just don't be a jerk on the air. Don't key down your radio when someone else is trying to talk and cause interference. Don't play music over the air when on a repeater that's trying to get used or during a net or something like that. And don't just badmouth people and use a bunch of foul language on the air. Don't do that. Just use it for what it's intended use for, and people will leave you alone for the most part.